Oh, hello there. Fancy meeting you here. Thanks for giving my video a chance to shine. If you subscribe, I'll know you're a person of impeccable taste and judgment. No pressure, though. Okay, maybe a little pressure. Let's get this show on the road. Do you think it's easy for me to say this out loud? Then give me a little space. I'm sorry if I sound harsh, but even now I'm wrestling with resentment that refuses to fade, no matter how many years pass. My life was steady, good even, until I discovered my wife's secret. She was gifted. I could probably have endured knowing she had this ability. What I still can't stomach is how proud she was of it, how thrilled she felt to be different. To her, it was a gift. To me, it was a curse disguised as one. I met Shauna McKee a lifetime ago, back when we both worked for a major telecommunications company in Inverness. She handled dispatch. I was out in the field as a telephone engineer. Her soft Highland lilt won me over before I'd even seen her face. And when I finally did, I found a red-headed beauty with a mischievous grin, lively eyes, and freckles scattered across her nose like constellations. She later admitted she'd first noticed me because of my name, Rob Roy McGregor. It amused her that I shared it with Scotland's infamous outlaw from the 17th century. Maybe she liked the idea of taming her own outlaw. My work sent me roaming across the Highlands, installing and maintaining masts and receivers for faster broadband service. It wasn't the tasks that thrilled me. It was the landscapes. My office was the raw beauty of the Scottish wilds, crisp air, endless hills, and soft light that stirred something deep inside me. After our son Robbie was born, Shona persuaded me to relocate to her hometown, Lochmagandy. Looking back, I wish I had hesitated. Not because the place lacked beauty, it's stunning, really. Her family lived close by, so there was always someone eager to mind Robbie for an evening or a weekend. But what I hadn't accounted for was the village itself, a tightly woven matriarchal community. The women called the shots, while the men spent their leisure hours nursing pints of beer or drams of whiskey at the pub, talking sheep prices and weather forecasts. On bright days, Lochmagandy could pass for paradise. Whitewashed cottages dotted the slopes, and the heart of the village, modest homes, shops, and small stone buildings, clustered around the square where the road ended at the loch's edge. Encircled on three sides by the hills of Hochemagandy, the glen felt sheltered, protected from harsh winds and bitter storms. But when heavy clouds rolled in and smothered the peaks, the beauty dimmed. The air turned bleak, the land somber. On such days, it was easy to believe the legend whispered about the loch, that it was haunted by Morag MacDarrell's restless spirit. Her story had been told for centuries. In the summer of 1744, Morag, a striking young woman full of life, met a brutal end. She lived in a time when existence was unforgiving and survival was hard-won. She was likely just past 18 when tragedy struck. According to the tale, Morag enjoyed harmless flirtation with the village lads, hoping perhaps to find herself a suitor. But one summer evening, 4 of them ambushed her as she walked home from the fields. Maybe they expected no resistance. But Morag fought back with ferocity, clawing at their faces and hands in a desperate attempt to defend her honor. That night, her father led a search party that found her, face down, floating in the shallows near the loch's bank. At first, villagers assumed she'd drowned while bathing in the ravine, but the truth surfaced quickly. She had been attacked. The 4 men bore scratches that betrayed them, though they swore ignorance of how she died. In such a small Highland village, losing 4 young men to punishment would devastate the workforce. Donald MacDarrell, clan chief and Morag's own relative, presided over the matter himself. Acting as judge and jury, he dismissed the assault charges, declaring them baseless. So the men walked free. They returned to their daily labor, while the women of the village muttered bitterly about justice denied. Over that winter, fear and superstition simmered in every hearthside whisper. Highlanders are deeply attuned to their land, and many believed Morag's soul would never rest. The loch, they said, was cursed, and fate itself would punish the guilty. Their fears seemed vindicated soon enough. By 1745, Donald MacDarrell and the very men implicated in Morag's death marched off to join Bonnie Prince Charlie's army. Few of them would ever return. On April 16, 1746, during the infamous Battle of Culloden, the Highland warriors, among them Donald and the same young men responsible for Morag's death, clashed fiercely with the army of Prince William, the Duke of Cumberland. None of them survived. Their deaths sent waves of grief through the women of the Glen, who now faced not only unbearable loss, but also the threat of utter ruin. With most of the men gone, the fragile balance of their community teetered on collapse. Hunger and poverty loomed ahead, and many feared they might be forced to abandon their valley altogether, reduced to begging or worse in the lowland towns just to stay alive. That they endured, and against all odds, rebuilt what they had lost, speaks to two equally powerful truths: their unshakable will to survive, and their readiness to take desperate measures when survival demanded it. In the absence of any adult male leadership, it was old MacDarrell's widow who stepped forward to lead the clan. Gathering several of the other women, she journeyed to Inverness and secured an audience with both the feared Butcher Cumberland and General George Wade. What was discussed behind closed doors remains a mystery to this day, but soon afterward, the future of Glen Magandie was unexpectedly safeguarded. Wade ordered the Glen to serve as a staging ground and supply depot for the British Army. Its lone road, easily defensible, offered a convenient military advantage, likely reason enough for his decision. Yet there are whispers that the women of the Glen promised something more: hospitality of a kind that soldiers would not forget. Indeed, by the closing decades of the 18th century, the mountain range of Hochmagandie was no longer merely a geographical landmark. Its name had become shorthand for merriment and indulgence. Though many Highlanders scorned what they saw as shameful capitulation, others recognized it as a pragmatic choice, perhaps the only path left to the women of Glen Magandie. And while soldiers came and went, seeds of renewal were quietly planted, both metaphorically and quite literally. Unlike so many neighboring Highland communities, which withered under oppression, Glen Magandie began to thrive again. The women carved out lives of relative peace in their secluded valley. They wove exquisite woolen cloth, their handiwork becoming highly sought after in the fashionable markets of Edinburgh and London. A new generation of children grew up in this unusual society, many of them fathered by passing soldiers, their heritage a mix of MacDarrell blood and foreign lineage. Leadership within the Glen gradually transformed as well. Chieftainship passed not from father to son, but from eldest daughter to eldest daughter, cementing a distinctly matriarchal order. Haunted by Morag MacDarrell's tragic fate, these women also took measures, some harsh, others quietly ingenious, to ensure such violence would never again befall their own. By the time my story truly begins, we had already spent 5 years living in Lochmagandie. Shauna and I were nearing our 7th wedding anniversary, and I felt content in a way I hadn't imagined possible. As spring gave way to summer, I often joked I was as happy as a hog basking on the moor. Every time I returned home after days spent traveling, Shauna welcomed me with an intensity that could only be described as fevered, almost like a hound in heat after too long apart. That Friday seemed unremarkable at first. Our son Robbie was away at a sleepover with Aunt Maggie and Uncle Duncan, visiting his cousin Malcolm, another flame-haired 6-year-old. The boys were inseparable, and we teasingly nicknamed them the Ginger Nuts. After a week spent inspecting equipment up north, I stopped by Maggie and Duncan's place on my way home to greet Robbie and thank them for giving Shauna and me a rare evening alone. Robbie hugged me quickly, but it was clear I'd lost my place at the center of his world. His only focus was playing with Malcolm. Watching them, I thought they might well remain best friends for life. By the time I walked through our own door, the savory aroma of beef stew laced with wild mountain thyme filled the air. Shauna was bustling about laying the table. Two tall candles stood in the center, a sure sign she hoped for romance later, and an uncorked bottle of Côte du Rhône awaited on the sideboard. She handed me a chilled beer as I shrugged off my coat and tossed my dirty clothes into the laundry basket. It always took me a good half hour to unwind after a week on the road. Shauna understood this rhythm perfectly and never pressed me for deep conversation straight away. Instead, she chattered about her week, relaying gossip and small village news while I sat sipping my beer, slowly letting the tension drain away. She stirred the stew, slid plates into the top oven to warm, and filled the quiet with easy talk about the celebration planned for the next evening, the 18th birthday of young Callum McDarrell. Callum's mother, the current lady chief, was hosting a grand affair. Fiddlers, Scottish reels, and dancers from across the county would fill the village hall. Guests of every age, from toddlers barely walking to bent-backed elders, were expected to attend. Shauna had grown especially close to Fiona, the lady chief herself, and had been helping Fiona and her husband, Dougal, organize the festivities. Lately, whenever I phoned from the road, it seemed Shauna was at their house, caught up in preparations. Her excitement over Callum's coming of age was palpable. She spoke of it often, proud to play a role in such an important milestone. Over dinner that night, she gushed again about how quickly Callum had grown, marveling that he would already be 18 come morning. Afterward, in the living room, she proudly showed me the gift she had chosen for him, a gold ring engraved with the letters CS, their curves elegantly entwined. "Why not CM for Callum McDarrell?" I asked without thinking. She hesitated, then answered quickly. "Stuart is his middle name," snapping the little velvet box shut before setting it down on the coffee table. I barely registered the odd moment. Her mischievous grin and sparkling eyes were already signaling other intentions. A glance was all it took to know she was ready to lead me upstairs. Cottages in the Highlands are usually built low to the ground, a single story, and ours was no exception. There were no stairs to climb. Before long, we were nestled under the sheets of our broad double bed. When Robbie left for the night, I assumed Saturday morning would be ours to share. But Shauna rose with the first light, cheerful and brisk, while I drifted in and out of sleep as she showered and dressed. "Morning, lazy bones," she teased with a grin. "I'm heading over to Fiona's. On the way back, I'll swing by the bakery and grab some breakfast rolls. You stay put for once, and after we eat, we'll pick up Robbie." Once she left, I debated staying in bed as she'd suggested, but the thought of chores nagged at me. I showered quickly, pulled on jeans and my green and black plaid shirt, then set the washer running before tidying the living room. That's when I noticed the small red box on the coffee table, the ring still inside, and beside it, an envelope addressed to Callum McDarrell. Clearly, Shauna had forgotten them in the rush. We could have given them to Callum later that evening, but I figured it would be easier to drop them off myself straight away. The chief's cottage stood alone, surrounded by land that legally belonged to him, secluded yet less than a mile from our place if I cut across the fields. The fresh air would do me good, I thought, clear away the lingering fog from the whiskey the night before. From the meadow I could see the lakeside village shimmering in the distance. The grass stretched high and thick, the kind sheep adore, and I vaulted 2 dry stone walls along the way. About 20 minutes later, I reached the stone barn that adjoined the cottage. To reach the front door, I had to skirt around the barn and walk down the northern side of the house. The chief's cottage was old, long and low, its thick whitewashed walls capped with black slate where thatch had once been. Built over 2 centuries ago, it was designed to conserve heat. The windows were narrow, especially on the north and west sides where wind and rain struck hardest. As I passed one of the larger windows on the north side, I froze. Through the glass I could see my wife. She was sprawled across a broad double bed with someone else. For a moment I couldn't breathe. It was as if time stopped. The world held still. At first I couldn't even register who the man was, but then his face turned toward the light. Callum McDarrell. My stomach lurched. I jerked back from the window, pressing my spine to the cold outer wall, gasping for air. I must have stopped breathing while the scene burned itself into my mind. If I hadn't witnessed it myself, I would never have believed it. A wave of nausea rolled over me. My mind reeled, refusing to accept what my eyes had just seen. Bending over, I braced my hands on my knees and drew deep breaths, struggling to steady myself. I have no idea how long I stayed like that. A couple of minutes, maybe. Training as a maintenance engineer had taught me to handle crises methodically, not impulsively. Sudden reactions were never my way. I didn't understand why Shauna would betray me like this, but lashing out would only hurt more people, Robbie most of all. I needed to gather facts before I acted. Keeping low, I retraced my steps back toward home, shielding myself behind the barn and a cluster of pines so no one inside could spot me. My thoughts tangled into knots of shock, confusion, and raw anger. The only explanation that made sense was that Shauna had planned this meeting. Her bad luck was that I'd decided not to linger in bed and had instead taken it upon myself to deliver what she'd forgotten. Back at the house, I set the ring box and envelope back on the coffee table, exactly where I'd found them. In the kitchen, I scribbled a note saying I'd gone walking around Hamagandi to enjoy the dry weather. Shauna knew I did this often. A 12-mile hike around the horseshoe ridge of the 3 tallest peaks, lunch packed and 6 hours gone. For the next several hours, I poured myself into the hills, letting the sweep of the highlands, the ridges, the wind, the endless views, calm the storm inside me. Step by step, the shock dulled, replaced by a grim clarity. By the time I returned home in the late afternoon, I still hadn't decided what to do. There was no undoing what I'd seen. The marriage I thought I had would never be the same. Hard choices lay ahead, but one thing I knew for certain. I wouldn't ignite a scandal before the holiday gathering. Word spreads faster than wildfire in mountain communities. Everyone gossips, everyone speculates, and soon truth is buried beneath rumor. For now, I would keep my silence. Never, under any circumstances, did I want the entire village, or worse, the whole country, intruding on the privacy of our lives. Holidays had a way of dragging private matters into the open, a dangerous kind of exposure where even the smallest hint, a missing husband, an unsettled wife, or a bruised birthday boy, could spark endless gossip. The walk through the hills helped settle my thoughts, yet when I came back after lunch, I still found it hard to meet Shauna's eyes. Thankfully, Robbie was there to break the tension. He climbed onto the sofa beside me, eager to share what he had been doing with his cousin. His proudest discovery? A handful of snails Malcolm had dug up in the garden. For someone only 6 years old, Robbie had a surprising knowledge of nature. We ended up talking about the difference between snails and slugs, and after a thoughtful pause, Robbie decided snails were the clever ones. They had grown shells, he reasoned, so they wouldn't hurt themselves. Shauna busied herself in the kitchen, frying Aberdeen Angus burgers, and by 6 o'clock we were gathered around the table, about as late as Robbie could reasonably handle. Over dinner, we talked about the evening's celebration, which was set to begin early enough for the younger children. Robbie and I would both wear our red McGregor kilts, and the 3 of us would arrive together when festivities started around 7. Robbie already knew there would be a clown performing tricks for the kids at the start of the night, keeping them entertained while the adults sipped drinks and chatted nearby. We hadn't discussed how long we'd stay. That would depend entirely on how Robbie was holding up. Scottish village dances have their own magic, everyone mingling, laughing, spinning across the floor with friends and strangers alike. It's a kind of social alchemy found in other traditions too. Circle dances, barn dances, line dances. In a place as small as Loma Gandhi, almost everyone ends up dancing with everyone else, and tonight would be no exception. Khalid opened the evening by leading the children through simple dances, parents and grandparents stepping in to guide them along. Robbie's favorite was the dashing white sergeant, which he had learned at school. The three of us, Robbie, Shauna, and I, formed a family trio, joining hands with others to whirl around the hall, linking into sixes before trading partners for the next lap. From the outside, I'm sure we looked like a happy family, moving in rhythm, laughing with Robbie. Inside, I was struggling to maintain the facade. Shauna, despite everything that had happened earlier that morning, looked utterly untroubled, smiling, radiant, graciously accepting praise for our talented son and for how beautifully the three of us danced together. I kept glancing around, half expecting her to invent a reason to slip away and speak to Callum McDarrell. Yet she didn't. Aside from greeting him when we arrived, handing him a card, a gift, and a cheerful happy birthday, she ignored him completely. No one watching would have suspected a thing. Not even me by that point. I began to wonder if maybe it had been nothing more than a fleeting infatuation. As the evening wore on, Robbie grew tired. Shauna spent most of her time watching over him while he played with Malcolm and the other children. I assumed she expected me to take Robbie home early, giving her an opportunity to dance and flirt with Callum. But to my surprise, she had arranged something else entirely. Robbie and Malcolm would both spend the night at our house. Around 9:30, Shauna and Maggie drove the boys back to our place. Maggie returned about 30 minutes later to let me know that she and Shauna had worked out a system. Each of them would take turns staying with the boys for an hour while the other enjoyed the party. Shauna, she said, would be back in roughly an hour to relieve her. I tried to keep myself occupied. I danced with Maggie for a while, then with a few of the other women, forcing myself to appear as though nothing was amiss. The music made conversation impossible, which was just as well. Eventually, I drifted toward the edge of the crowd, nursing a beer and listening to the fiddlers play reels, strathspeys, and jigs. My eyes wandered toward the band, but in truth, I was scanning the room, searching for any sign that someone, anyone, might know what was really happening with Shauna. I couldn't be sure. Now and then, I caught a woman glancing my way. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps pity, or perhaps nothing more than idle interest. Callum McDarrell, the birthday boy, had done his fair share of dancing. His grandmothers, his aunts, and his mother's friends all took turns spinning him around the floor. When the women needed a rest, the men stepped in, buying him beers, clapping him on the shoulder, making sure the night stayed lively for him. There was no denying his charm or the effortless way people gravitated toward him. Under different circumstances, I might even have offered to buy him a drink myself. But tonight wasn't one of those occasions. As I stood at the bar waiting for my pint, I realized I'd taken the empty stool beside Callum's father, Dougal. I had no idea whether he knew anything about what had been going on between Callum and Shauna, but here, by sheer chance, was my opportunity to test the waters, if only slightly. "You must be proud of him," I said, giving Dougal a polite smile. "I suppose I am," he answered, his tone measured but not unfriendly. "Tell me," I went on casually, "was Callum named after anyone in the family?" "Yes," Dougal nodded. "He's named after his maternal grandfather." "And his middle name?" I asked. "Would that be after you?" No, he corrected me. "That's Hector, after his father's father." "Ah," I said with a feigned lightness. "And are either of these gentlemen with us tonight?" "Only in spirit," Dougal replied. "Callum's grandfather emigrated to Canada years ago, and Hector lives in Australia with my sister and her family." "A shame they couldn't be here," I said, ending the exchange as I paid for my drink. Still, the brief conversation had given me something I needed. Confirmation that what I'd suspected earlier wasn't some impulsive accident. The gold ring I'd seen bore a C, unmistakably for Callum, and though the other initial was less clear, I was certain it represented Shauna. Together, the entwined letters struck me as less a romantic flourish and more a cruel emblem of betrayal. My mood didn't improve when Shauna reappeared shortly after 11. She scanned the hall briefly, offered me a small wave, and went straight toward Callum McDarrell. Was this the moment they'd been anticipating all evening? At first glance, it seemed innocent, just my wife taking a turn on the floor with the birthday boy. But the glow of expectation on both their faces was unmistakable to anyone looking closely. He didn't hesitate for an instant, and within moments they were spinning across the dance floor together, her laughter mingling with his. Most people might not have noticed a thing, but I had been paying attention all night, reading the subtle expressions of those who already knew more than they should. From where I stood, I caught my mother-in-law and sister-in-law exchanging quick glances in my direction. Furtive, almost amused. They knew, or at least they suspected. The thought that I was the only fool in the room twisted the knife further. I forced a neutral expression and stayed put until they'd finished 2 dances. When neither made a move to step off the floor, I slipped outside into the night air, needing distance more than anything. The darkness outside was heavy, the kind that swallowed sound. But even out here, I couldn't shake the feeling that half of Loch Magundy had pieced together my humiliation. Dougal appeared behind me. "You don't look yourself, Rob," he said quietly. "Something wrong?" "Your son," I said flatly. "And my wife." He exhaled sharply, not surprised. "So you've worked it out?" "Seems like everyone has," I muttered. "Please," he said carefully, "don't turn this into a scene. Fiona, she wants to speak with you tomorrow morning. She thinks she can help clarify things. Just hold out until then." I studied him in silence. "When Shauna takes Robbie to church, meet us," Dougal continued. "Fiona will explain. May I tell her you'll be there?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure what good it'll do, Dougal. But fine, I'll wait. I won't make trouble tonight. Just keep Callum away from her. The last thing I need is to watch them flaunt it in front of everyone." "Thank you," he said, relief flickering across his face. "I'll talk to him." I lingered outside for another few minutes before heading back inside. By then, Shauna was on the floor with Duncan, her brother-in-law, while Callum had taken up with his older sister Heather, a striking, raven-haired young woman of 22, next in line for the chieftainship, currently studying finance at Inverness. When the music stopped, Shauna bounded over to me, wrapping me in a hug and pressing a kiss to my lips. Her joy was unrestrained. She hadn't the faintest clue I knew. We closed the evening with one final dance, then strolled hand in hand up the hill toward our cottage. I played my part convincingly, smiling and nodding while she gushed about the party. How marvelous the band had been. How everyone said they'd loved it. How unforgettable the whole night was. And I let her talk. Because for the moment, silence was all I could manage. I kept my mouth shut and threw in the occasional half-hearted comment. A quiet "yeah here," a muttered "right there," just enough to keep her talking without really engaging. Maggie was thrilled to see us, her face lighting up as she agreed to let Shauna and me take both boys to church the next morning. Malcolm, she said, would meet Mom and Dad there later. Shauna checked on the boys, making sure they were settled, and then headed straight to bed. By the time I'd finished brushing my teeth, she was already fast asleep, breathing evenly as if nothing in the world weighed on her. I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, thoughts churning, wondering what the clan leader could possibly say to shift the storm in my head. Deep down, I felt certain my marriage had already suffered a mortal wound, and I doubted Lady Fiona or anyone could revive it. The next morning, Shauna took the initiative. She made breakfast for the boys and bundled them off to church herself. I'd claimed I had a dull headache and needed some air, though in truth I just couldn't face that crowd again. As the faithful of Loch Magundy streamed toward the village kirk on that Saturday morning, I found myself retracing the same lonely steps I'd walked only a day before, back toward heartbreak. Soon I stood outside the chief's cottage. When I knocked, Fiona answered almost immediately. "Thank you for coming, Rob," she said softly, ushering me into the living room. "Everyone's at church, so we'll have some privacy. I'll put the kettle on. Tea, unless you'd prefer whiskey?" I didn't particularly want tea, but refusing would have felt discourteous. And besides, the coming conversation promised to be hard enough without starting on the wrong foot. Fiona returned with 2 steaming cups, and we settled into padded armchairs across from one another, the fire crackling faintly in the hearth. I waited in silence for her to begin. "I'm truly sorry to hear about Sean and Callum," she said at last, her voice edged with genuine concern. "May I ask how you found out?" I clenched my jaw, struggling to maintain composure, especially with little Robbie and Malcolm so often nearby. But Fiona must have seen the anger in my eyes. "It doesn't matter how I know," I replied evenly. "No one's told me directly, but it seems half the village is aware that your son's been entertaining my wife." "Rob," Fiona said quietly, "there's more to this than you realize. It's a long story, but I need you to hear me out before you decide anything. Can you promise me that?" I exhaled sharply. "Fine. Say what you have to say. I doubt it'll change anything." "Thank you," she said. "I won't deny that Shauna and Callum were close. But you don't know the full story. Shauna was gifted." "Gifted?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean talented? Blessed by God?" "No," Fiona said, shaking her head. "I mean the gift a woman gives to a young man when he comes of age." I stared at her, stunned. "Wait, you're telling me Shauna and Callum were together because of some kind of tradition? A rite of passage for boys when they turn 18? "In a manner of speaking, yes," she replied. "It's part of an old custom in Glenmagandy, one that began after Morag McDarrell's time. Everyone knows Morag's story. After 1745, when the men of the Glen were lost or scattered, the women took charge of rebuilding the valley. They worked tirelessly to keep the community alive and thriving. They even welcomed redcoat soldiers into their beds," I cut in bitterly. "True," Fiona admitted, "but what most people don't realize is that these same women also vowed to protect the younger generations, especially the young women, from harm at the hands of reckless men." I frowned. "So let me get this straight. It wasn't enough for those women to take in soldiers. They decided to entertain local boys too." "You're twisting my words, Rob," Fiona said, her tone firm. "That's not what it was about. The women chosen for gifting were maidens or widows, women left behind by war. For decades, Glenmagandy's men sought fortunes abroad. They fought in North America, against the French, against native tribes, later against Mexicans under Santa Anna. Some even bled in the American Civil War. When they weren't fighting, they chased gold in California. And through all of it, women were scarce." She went on, voice low but steady. "The cycle continued into the 20th century. Boer War, World War I, the Spanish Civil War, World War II, Korea. For over 200 years, there were always more unmarried women than men. The gifting tradition grew from that." I leaned forward, incredulous. "If it's supposed to involve unmarried women, then how the hell did Shauna end up in it?" "These days," Fiona explained, "every woman of the Glen is expected to uphold the tradition. But times have changed. Our men aren't dying in battle anymore. That means fewer widows, fewer single women. So now the ones who are gifted are usually wives whose husbands spend long stretches away, working offshore on oil rigs, or living in Glasgow or Edinburgh during the week. The idea is simple. The woman is available without disrupting her home life." I let out a bitter laugh. "Sounds to me like the whole tradition's just an excuse for older women to sneak around with young lads." "That's absolutely untrue," she answered firmly. "So you're speaking from personal experience, Fiona?" I pressed. "Have you ever been gifted yourself?" I don't have to answer that, she said calmly. But I'll tell you anyway, Rob. Yes, I have. It was many years ago, and that's all I'll say about it. She continued, her voice steady. When a woman is gifted to a young man, both are expected to behave with dignity. Their relationship is meant to be private, discreet. Shauna and Callum, perhaps, should have shown more restraint last night. So you're saying Shauna willingly offered herself to Callum, but they should have kept it quiet? I asked bitterly. It's more than that, Rob, Fiona replied. A gift isn't casual. It's given with care, with tenderness. There's a formal courtship lasting 3 months, ending on the young man's 18th birthday. During that time, the pair meet often, talk about everything that matters, their future, their hopes, and spend time truly getting to know each other. There's no intimacy during this period, except maybe holding hands, perhaps a kiss or two. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No wonder my wife had been visiting Fiona's cottage so often these past few months. She'd been seeing Callum. But this is worse than I thought, I said. You're telling me this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. It's practically an affair. Fiona hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully. I understand how hard this must be for you, Rob. But the connection between Shauna and Callum isn't really an affair. It doesn't threaten your marriage. Callum needs to learn how to treat women and navigate relationships, and Shauna has chosen to guide him through that. Of course, none of us wanted you to find out Shauna was gifted, she added gently. But you should know. Gifting women is an old tradition here. It's deeply respected, and gifted women are regarded with the highest honor. That might be true, I said sharply. But who decides all this? Who arranges these gifts? A young man can express a preference, Fiona explained, meeting my gaze without flinching. But the final decision is always made by the clan chief. No one, neither the woman nor the young man, is forced into it. Every pairing is considered carefully. So let me guess, I said coldly. Callum told you he wanted my wife. You asked her, and she agreed. That's a crude way to put it, Rob, she protested. Crude? It's accurate. What better person, right? Shauna gets to teach him about love, respect, and adulthood. She is the best choice, Fiona insisted quietly. The only thing he's learned is lust, I shot back. Lust for my wife, disrespect for me, and no thought for the consequences. And what about pregnancy? I demanded. That's a hell of a price to pay for a few moments of pleasure. That decision is left to the gifted couple, Fiona replied evenly. Traditionally, the gift is unconditional. Many children here in the Glen were conceived through gifting, children whose mothers might never have had families otherwise. It's been this way for centuries. After the First and Second World Wars, many widows bore children because of this custom. It kept the Highlands alive. So besides the occasional bastard child, I muttered bitterly, what other consequences are there for women gifted to young men? Very few, Fiona said. Only 1 or 2 minor problems in all these years. And when something does go wrong, we step in. And when was the last time that happened? I asked. When John and Mary MacDonald left for Glasgow, she said softly. Right after you moved here. That's why they left? I asked, stunned. Yes, Mary became too attached to the boy she was gifted with. She wanted their bond to last longer than the year it was meant to. So it wasn't just a quick fling? I scoffed. You don't understand, Rob, Fiona said patiently. A gift isn't just a reward for good behavior. It's meant to encourage young men to stay here longer. Most of them are unsure about their future. The gift lasts for a year, or until the young man decides to leave the Glen. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you telling me Callum expects to be with Shauna for the next 12 months? Please try to see this for what it is, Fiona urged. Gifting has calmed our young men. It's stopped the anger and aggression that used to plague them. These women help them grow into respectful, confident adults. Of course, there's physical closeness involved, but beyond that, this period is about the young man learning what it means to understand women, to grasp relationships, and to step into adulthood better prepared. That sounds fine to you, Fiona, I said sharply, but do you honestly believe I'll stand by while Callum entertains Sean? Pigs will fly over the roof before I allow that. Rob, I know this upsets you, Fiona replied gently, but you must understand, this is part of Shauna's inheritance. As a woman of the Glenn McGandy line, she doesn't really have a choice, and it won't last forever. Speak to her if you must, but take my advice. Don't go in heavy-handed. Ultimatums rarely work. The conversation had clearly run its course. I rose from my chair. I've heard you out, Fiona. I've tried to see it from your side. But as far as I can tell, nothing's improved. If anything, things are getting worse. Still, thanks for the tea and for listening. She walked me to the door. Don't do anything reckless, Rob. And remember, you can always talk to me. As I stepped outside, I couldn't help wondering if Fiona would warn Shauna about what I now knew. A part of me wanted that surprise, to catch Shauna off guard, to see her unfiltered reaction rather than one rehearsed. When Shauna and Robbie came home from church later, I couldn't tell for certain whether she'd been tipped off. She looked unsettled, though, like someone caught between composure and guilt. Sunday lunches were always Robbie's favorite. Bacon rolls in the kitchen, the smell of fried bread and ketchup filling the air. His excitement was infectious, though we constantly had to guard against spills, and against his lack of self-control when it came to portion sizes. After we'd eaten, I settled him in the living room with his toy cars. Once he was content, I returned to the kitchen where Shauna was tidying up. Her eyes followed me closely as I sat down. She knew what was coming. I didn't bother with pretense. I know about you and Callum, I said flatly. She exhaled, almost relieved. I know you know, she answered quietly. Why, Shauna? Why would you do this? Because I'm a Glenn McGandy woman, Rob. You can take me out of the Glen, but you'll never take the Glen out of me. This is who I am. It's my duty, my destiny, our legacy. You can't just toss aside 2.5 centuries of tradition, she continued, voice firm. A heritage passed from mother to daughter, safeguarding everything our people stand for. And what about us? I asked, voice breaking. Did you think of what this would do to us? Of course I did. I'm sorry you're hurt. But I love you, Rob. And I know you love me. This doesn't change that. What I'm doing doesn't threaten what we have. I don't see how you can say that, I replied, my hands trembling. You've broken your vows. You've put our marriage in danger. Don't frame it like that, she pleaded. We can make this right. In time, you'll see. Our marriage will survive. It will even be stronger. I knew you'd find out, she admitted. I just didn't expect it so soon. Maybe that's why I wasn't ready for this talk. Then she looked me straight in the eye. I'm not in love with Callum, Rob, and he's not in love with me. This isn't an affair. I guide him, reward him when he behaves, teach him how to navigate life. That's all. It doesn't take anything from you. How can you even say that? I asked bitterly. Because nothing really changes. You'll still have me, every time you're here. When you're away, I tend to Callum. You rarely even see him. On weekends, he's off with his friends. Football in Inverness, music festivals, whatever it is. That won't change. You're asking me to share my wife, I said, my voice low and tight. No, she said calmly. You'll still have all of me. Everything you've always had. I'm 32, Rob. I have more to give than just what's between us. What I offer him doesn't diminish what I give you. It's extra. I shook my head. We'll have to disagree. I don't own you, Shauna, but you are my wife, and I am your husband. I can't accept that you'd set aside your vows, even temporarily. That's such a narrow way to see this, she answered. I thought you'd look past the details and see the greater good, the honor in what I'm doing. I've been entrusted with the task of shaping this boy into a man. That's no ordinary responsibility. What makes it even more significant is that he's the chief's son. You make it sound almost like some sacred rite or mystical transformation, I said to Shauna. In reality, though, isn't this just an affair? A young man eager to amuse you and claim you for himself? You may think so, Rob, she answered calmly. But this arrangement is far from ordinary. Many women before me have followed this same path. Their husbands, more often than not, understood. They saw it as a small price to pay for the peace and prosperity it brings to the Glen. And if a husband refuses to accept it? I asked. Most don't. They turn a blind eye and let it pass. On rare occasions, if a man objects, he leaves the Glen altogether. As you know, Rob, when it comes to decisions about this valley, it's the women who hold the real power. That sounds a lot like an ultimatum, I replied sharply. Fiona warned me never to give you ultimatums, she said, a hint of frustration in her voice. So I don't understand why you think I'd do that now. I'm not forcing you into anything. In fact, everyone, including you, would be better off if you simply did nothing. This is new to you. You need time and space to sort out your feelings. I think we both need to take time to think about this, Shauna, I said. I have a pretty good idea what I should do, but I'll wait a few days. If you can promise me you'll stay away from Callum. I didn't wait for her response. Instead, I walked into the living room to see if Robbie wanted to go out. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Shauna had time to herself, and I finally had a few precious hours with my son. During the week, work kept me away from home, so these moments with Robbie meant everything to me. We usually wandered down to the lake's edge, searching the reedy shallows for wading birds. Robbie's favorite was always the gray heron, with its gangly legs, long pointed beak, and striking gray, black, and white feathers. That day, he spotted one standing alone, hunched and motionless, its long neck folded against its chest as if trying to disappear from the world. For the rest of the day, Shauna and I barely exchanged words. We both made an effort to keep the mood light for Robbie, who eagerly chattered about the heron and what he wanted to do in the coming week. He seemed oblivious to the heavy silence that hung between his parents. Shauna, as far as I could tell, was deliberately staying quiet, hoping the tension would ease, that I'd eventually see things her way. She didn't seem to realize how deep my anger ran, or how hard I was working to keep it contained by refusing to argue any further. There was nothing I could do if she continued ignoring my plea to keep her distance from Callum. As I packed my bag that evening, I couldn't stop imagining what it might feel like if I were forced to leave our home for good. The thought was unbearable. It felt like the three of us had been in a terrible accident, and Shauna, the woman I loved, had been ripped away in an instant. All I had left was my son, and I couldn't fathom losing him too. I needed time to process, to understand, to figure out what I could possibly do. I woke early the next morning, determined to leave before Shauna came downstairs. I was finishing my coffee and slipping on my jacket when she appeared in her robe. Her eyes were swollen and red. She clearly hadn't slept. "Drive safe, Rob," she said quietly as I headed for the door. "And please remember, I love you. Let's talk later this week." "Okay, Shauna," I replied flatly. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of hearing the same words back. Looking back now, that week passed in a fog. I didn't call her, and she didn't call me. That wasn't unusual. I often worked in remote places where the signal was weak. It was one of the reasons we were trying so hard to modernize the telecommunications network. By Thursday night, as usual, I was checked into the serviced apartment the company rented for me in Inverness. It was far more comfortable than a sterile hotel room, cozy, with everything I needed, even a decent selection of whiskey. I was wrapping up my weekly reports ahead of Friday's management meeting when the doorbell rang around 7. When I opened the door, Lady Fiona stood there. She was dressed for the country chill, dark green barber jacket, fitted khaki trousers, and sturdy brown leather boots that reached her knees. I had no doubt her British racing green Range Rover was parked outside. "Good evening, Rob," she said with a polite smile. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. May I come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. She removed her jacket, revealing a simple white blouse under a beige cardigan, and settled gracefully into one of the chairs in the living room. I wasn't exactly shocked to see her standing there, but I still couldn't help blurting out the obvious question. "You actually came all the way to Inverness just to see me, Fiona?" "More or less," she replied with a calm shrug. "I met my daughter earlier this afternoon, but you're the real reason I'm here. If you don't mind, I'd love a cup of tea before we talk about everything." I headed into the kitchen and set the kettle on the stove. In Britain, tea isn't just about being polite. It's practically a coping mechanism. Bad news? Boil water. Trouble on the horizon? Put the kettle on. The ritual buys you a moment to breathe, to brace yourself. And I needed that moment. Fiona's sudden visit had me uneasy, though I couldn't yet put my finger on why. She wasn't young anymore, and her clothing was so reserved that I was certain seduction wasn't her motive. Still, she clearly had an agenda, and I silently hoped it wouldn't be disastrous. By the time I returned with 2 steaming cups, she wasted no time on small talk. "Let me be direct, Rob," she said firmly. "I've been speaking with Shauna about our situation. I think we might have a way to fix things, at least partially. That's why I'm here." "I won't pretend it'll be simple," I replied cautiously. "But thank you for coming. It sounds like you might actually have good news. Does this mean Shauna isn't going through with the donation?" "Not quite," she said evenly. "But we've spent a lot of time thinking about your feelings, trying to see it from where you stand. Shauna and I both realize we misjudged how you'd react. We want to see if we can make amends." "I don't see how you can," I said flatly. "Not while Shauna keeps enjoying herself with Callum." "I'm not going to get sidetracked by your choice of words," Fiona interjected gently. "But I'd rather you didn't swear, Rob. I know you're angry, but maybe say, gave herself to Callum, instead of using the other word." "Fine," I muttered. "But if she keeps giving herself to Callum, how exactly does that solve anything?" "That," Fiona admitted, "was the heart of our dilemma. We kept looking at only one side of things. Then we considered your perspective. Shauna gains something while you gain nothing, maybe even lose something." "That's not entirely wrong," I conceded. "But go on." "Thank you," she said, almost relieved. "I think you might like the solution we've come up with." "And what would that be?" I asked warily. "Heather," she replied. I blinked. "Heather?" "Yes. My daughter, Heather," she said calmly. "She lives here in Inverness. She can take care of your needs here, while Shauna continues helping her brother in Glenmagandy." I stared at her, stunned. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," Fiona said without hesitation. "Heather thinks you're a great man. Honestly, she's enthusiastic about the idea." The shock left me speechless. Up until that moment, I'd clung to the faint hope that Fiona might tell me Shauna had changed her mind, that the donation, or whatever they called it, was off the table. Instead, she was offering her own daughter as some kind of consolation prize. Fiona clearly knew she'd thrown me off balance. She tilted her head slightly, an eyebrow raised, waiting for me to respond. And in that instant, the haze of confusion I'd been living in lifted. The sorrow, the numb depression of the past few days, all of it evaporated, replaced by a cold, focused anger. It was in that moment of clarity I understood. My marriage was already gone. Shauna was lost to me, and nothing Fiona could say would change that. But I also knew, with absolute certainty, that one day I would settle the score, with all of them. Not now, not here. I couldn't show my hand. That's quite an offer, Fiona, I said evenly. If I've got this straight, what you're suggesting is that Shauna will continue giving herself to Callum no matter what. But to balance the equation, you're offering me Heather? That's exactly it, she confirmed with a nod. I gave a slow exhale. All right, Fiona. I don't know what to say yet. I'll need time to think. I'll speak with Shauna this weekend. We'll figure out our next steps later. All right, Rob. I suppose that's the outcome we were hoping for. Thanks for the tea, she murmured as she stood up. I'll spend the night at Heather's place. She passed me a slip of paper. This is her number, she added. I'll let her know you might call. When I drove back to Glen McGandy that Friday evening, my thoughts were tangled, still circling the question of what I should do next. For now, I needed reassurance, confirmation that Shauna would continue enjoying her time with Callum regardless of what I said or chose. If my wife truly wanted to pursue something with another man, then she and I wouldn't have a future together, though I doubted she'd even considered that possibility. On top of that, I still had to decide whether accepting Heather McDarrell's proposal was some kind of hollow consolation prize. Only after that could I focus on securing myself for the long haul. When I finally walked through the door, Shauna was buzzing with restless energy. I think she appreciated Robbie keeping me occupied for an hour before heading off to bed. Meanwhile, she seemed determined to recreate the magic of the night we'd shared exactly a week ago. She handed me a chilled beer as Robbie chattered nearby, and then she busied herself in the kitchen, preparing ragu bolognese. Once Robbie was tucked in, Shauna opened a bottle of Barbera d'Asti, and we sat down to eat together. I suspected where the conversation was heading, but I waited for Shauna to bring it up herself. Fiona mentioned she spoke to you last night, she began. What do you think about the arrangement we came up with? It's not what I wanted, I admitted. Did you see Callum while I was gone this week? She lowered her eyes, avoiding mine. I'm sorry, Rob, she whispered. I've been chosen for him. I can't refuse that. So Fiona was right? You decided to go through with it after all? Her expression was conflicted, anxious, yet resolute. Yes, she answered softly, nodding to affirm her choice. I know you hate this, Rob, but it's what I have to do. I gave her one final chance to reconsider. I hear you, I said quietly, but I still don't understand why you have to do this. I'm not going to threaten you or corner you with ultimatums. You have to choose what you want on your own. I can't force you to stop, but can you honestly live with the fallout, whatever it ends up being? Yes, Rob. I know it'll be hard, but I believe I can handle it. It won't last forever. And if you feel the need to balance the scales, I won't hold it against you. I think you're making a huge mistake, Shauna, I said, shaking my head. But it sounds like your mind's already made up. Is there anything I can say or do to change this? No, Rob. I don't think there ever was, she replied steadily. Then she hesitated and said something I wasn't prepared for. There's something I never told you. I'm gifted myself. I wouldn't even exist if it weren't for that. My mother was gifted, and I'm the result of that gift. My biological father was a young man she was given to. The very reason I exist is because of this tradition. So it was almost inevitable that the cycle would continue, that I'd become gifted in turn. Wait a second, I said sharply. You told me your father died in a car crash when your mom was pregnant with you. Are you saying he wasn't actually your father? That's right, she replied. My mom's husband, my dad, did die when his car went over a cliff. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but his insurance covered everything, so we never struggled financially. I don't think my mom ever really recovered from losing him. She only told me the truth about my real father when I was a teenager. That's why my medical records never lined up with what I'd always believed. That's one hell of a revelation, Shauna, I muttered. But I still don't understand why that means you need to be involved with some teenage boy. Rob, this is my destiny. Being gifted brought me into this world, and because of that, I've become gifted myself. In that moment, I realized there was nothing left to say, nothing that would change her mind. I simply gave a silent nod. For several minutes, neither of us spoke as we focused on our food, lost in separate thoughts. But one last question weighed heavily on my mind. From this point forward, I finally said, I don't want Robbie spending time with Callum or anyone in his family. Can you agree to that? Of course, she answered quickly, her smile tinged with uncertainty. Perhaps she assumed I was finally adjusting to the new reality between us. In truth, it was nothing more than damage control, an attempt to shield my son from behavior I considered dangerous to his young mind. The upheaval in our family dynamic was already more than enough for him to process. After dinner, I poured myself a generous measure of an 18-year-old Glenfarclough single malt. I savored it slowly while we sat together, letting meaningless television chatter fill the silence. When we eventually went to bed close to midnight, I felt as though a tremendous burden had been lifted. Sleep came quickly, almost mercifully. Whether Shauna slept as peacefully, I can't say, but I knew deep down that some part of me had already accepted what had happened, and that there was no going back. The next morning, Sunday, I told Shauna I wouldn't be joining her and Robbie at church anymore. I couldn't stomach pretending everything was fine, couldn't play the part of the dutiful husband while silently wearing the label of cuckold for the entire congregation to see. She likely suspected the real reason, though she didn't press me on it. "Why won't you come to church?" she finally asked. "Have you lost your faith?" "No," I replied, "but I don't think he's there. I'll go walk in the hills instead. If God wants to find me, he can find me there." But I never set foot on the hills that morning. Instead, I used the time alone to move my belongings into the guest room. Shauna didn't realize what I'd done until nightfall. When she came upstairs and found me already in bed with the lights off, she hesitated at the door. "What are you doing in here, Rob?" she asked softly. "What does it look like, Shauna?" I answered evenly. "I'm not sharing a bed with you as long as you're sharing it with Callum McDarrell." "Oh, come on, Rob, really?" "Damn right," I shot back. "I won't make a scene about it, but either you get used to this arrangement or I'll move out completely. For Robbie's sake, I hope it doesn't come to that." Her face tightened with irritation, lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine, Rob, if that's how you want it. I think you're being ridiculous, cutting off your nose to spite your face. You know where to find me if you change your mind." The following week, while traveling for work, I made another decision. I wouldn't approach Heather McDarrell as some bizarre form of compensation for what I'd lost. I refused to participate in any twisted arithmetic of infidelity. If I pursued Heather, it would be on my own terms, purely for my own reasons, and only if she was willing, without pressure or expectation. I'd learned long ago how to salvage something worthwhile from a bad situation. Back in the day, my girlfriend at the time despised my smoking habit. "Kissing you is like kissing an ashtray," she complained. She gave me an ultimatum: quit cigarettes or lose her. I understood her point and gave them up. The first 2 months were hell. I was irritable, short-tempered, like a bear nursing a sore head. And then, just when I'd finally quit, she dumped me anyway. But I turned that misery into something useful. I never touched another cigarette again, and in time I became fitter, healthier. Shauna's affair with Callum felt like déjà vu, another disaster I couldn't undo. No matter what I tried, the marriage was beyond saving. So the question became, how could I salvage something good from it this time? One answer presented itself: Heather McDarrell. On Wednesday, I called her, and we arranged to meet for dinner in Inverness the following night. I could have invited her straight to my place, but that wasn't my style. Besides, we needed to talk seriously if this was going to be an ongoing thing. Over dinner, I discovered far more about her than I'd expected. Heather wasn't just strikingly attractive. She was intelligent, engaging, and easy to talk to. She would be starting her final year of university in September, balancing studies with a summer job at a respected accounting firm in Inverness. She also mentioned she had a steady boyfriend, Donnie, who was studying agriculture at UHI. During the summer, he worked on a farm and only came back on weekends. That left her free during the week to spend time with me whenever I stayed in Inverness, a casual arrangement she called friends with benefits. When she explained this, her grin was almost mischievous. I couldn't help feeling a twinge of pity for Donnie, though she assured me they weren't exclusive. I was almost certain he believed otherwise. Her mother didn't interfere, so that Thursday night I brought Heather back to the apartment. I hadn't been with anyone but Shauna for nearly 8 years, and I'd almost forgotten how thrilling it felt to discover someone new. Heather was eager for something uncomplicated. No strings, just a brief fling with an older man she found trustworthy. That was precisely how her mother had described me. The next day, I took Friday off work to speak with a lawyer. I wanted to be prepared for whatever might follow the choices I was planning to make. As summer faded into autumn, life somehow managed to become both better and worse. Things between Shauna and me shifted. Though she still spent time with Callum McDarrell, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. I continued doing the same household tasks as before, yet I felt no affection toward her and avoided any outings with her friends or family. Instead, I poured my attention into Robbie. Even if it was just the three of us, I made a point of bonding with him. For instance, when we walked somewhere, I gladly held Robbie's hand, but not hers. Our weekends were still pleasant enough. We'd take Robbie on picnics through the hills or drive out to the coast to buy lobsters and crabs from a small fishing harbor. Shauna must have understood why I was distant, though perhaps she thought it wouldn't last. Without ever saying it aloud, we seemed to agree not to mention her affair or the state of our marriage. That suited me. I already knew what I intended to do, and I had no desire to reveal my plans prematurely. Meanwhile, things with Heather McDarrell were only growing more exciting. Every Thursday, when work kept me in Inverness, she would come over. She'd make dinner, stay the night, and tell her neighbors she was visiting an elderly aunt each week. Around mid-September, everything unraveled, or more accurately, everything came up, quite literally. I was cooking breakfast one Sunday morning when I heard someone retching in the bathroom. Moments later, Shauna appeared in the doorway, pale and gripping her robe. "Rob, could you make me some weak tea? No milk, no sugar," she murmured, leaning heavily on the frame. "I'm going to lie down." "Sure, Shauna," I said. "By the way, how far along are you?" Her shoulders slumped. "I don't know," she sighed. "We'll talk later." Then she shuffled back to bed. She spent most of that Sunday resting. The weather was beautiful, so Robbie and I went for a drive through the countryside to admire the autumn leaves. We stopped at a cozy inn for lunch and returned late in the afternoon. Robbie collected a handful of colorful leaves for his mother and proudly presented them to her when we got home. She was slouched on the couch in sweatpants and a loose pullover, trying to smile as he chattered about why leaves change color, facts he'd memorized from me, even noting that in other countries autumn is called fall because the leaves drop. I felt proud of him. That evening, after Robbie went to bed, Shauna and I had a serious, though strangely calm, conversation. She told me she had already seen the doctor earlier that week, after her first bout of nausea. The tests confirmed she was pregnant, somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks. She hadn't told Callum yet. He'd already accepted a place at Edinburgh University and was set to leave the Glen in just a few days. "So now you expect me to pretend none of this ever happened?" I asked. "You knew this was only temporary, Rob," she said quietly. "Now that Callum's leaving, it's finished." "I can't just erase everything," I replied. "After months of you being with him, and now you're carrying his child?" "I'm begging you," she whispered. "Please, just forgive me. Forget what happened." "You've always been a devoted husband and father, Rob. A child deserves to grow up surrounded by love, and I hope you see that." "That's not quite how I see it," I answered calmly. "To me, Callum and you need to own up to the results of your choices. Don't expect me to shoulder that with you." "This baby won't be a burden," she protested softly. "It'll be good for Robbie to have a younger brother or sister. Another little one won't even make much difference to our expenses." "You don't get it," I told her flatly. "I don't want reconciliation, and I will not claim responsibility for a child that isn't mine." Her eyes widened, stunned, and then tears flooded them. "How can you be so heartless?" she cried, bolting from the room. Days later, while I was away traveling, Shauna filed for divorce. In her petition, she laid out the dates and details of her affair with Callum McDarrell and even acknowledged that the child she carried was his. For all her time spent living in a fantasy, I thought reality must surely hit her now. She would have to face the consequences of her actions alone. She phoned me when the papers arrived. She was hysterical, unable to make sense of it all. Her main question: how could I be so cruel? My answer: hadn't she been cruel to me first? That weekend, I stayed away from Lakhmagandhi. I refused to set foot in the house where Shauna lived, refused to give anyone the impression our marriage was anything but finished. It was a painful choice, but I believed soon I'd at least be allowed brief weekend visits with Robbie, even if it meant driving from Inverness every time. The very day Shauna received the summons, I called Heather McDarrell. I told her bluntly that Shauna and I were divorcing and that our friendship was over. I had enjoyed Heather's company, yes, but I wanted no further complications, especially since her boyfriend Donnie seemed serious about her. In the months that followed, people tried to interfere. Lady Fiona, for one, confronted me angrily, claiming I had broken some promise to her. I reminded her I'd never once said I wouldn't divorce Shauna. Heather's kindness toward me had been unconditional. No bargains, no deals. And realistically, I doubted Lady Fiona would ever risk the embarrassment of her daughter's affair becoming public knowledge in court. A solicitor had once explained Scottish law to me. After 2 years of separation, either spouse can file for divorce, even if the other refuses consent. I could have waited and taken that route, but instead I filed on grounds of adultery, naming Callum outright. Not because I was cruel for cruelty's sake, though I'll admit there was some satisfaction in calling him out publicly. But more than that, I wanted no legal tie to Shauna's child. Had I stayed married, I could have been saddled with parental obligations for a baby that wasn't mine. Callum and Shauna could carry that responsibility together. The child support agency would see to it Callum paid his share. I needed this divorce finalized quickly to avoid that nightmare. Family lawyers are as grasping as any barristers, but I made Shauna a generous offer. She could keep the Lakhmagandhi cottage, and I agreed to monthly child support for Robbie until his 18th birthday. Our solicitors dragged their feet, both angling for more money, so the process dragged on for months. Eventually, though, Shauna accepted reality. Our marriage was over. Word reached me that she had struck some financial arrangement with Callum's family. Her pregnancy went smoothly. By late April, just weeks after the divorce was finalized, she delivered a baby girl. I rented a small flat in Inverness and established a routine. Every other Saturday, I drove to Lakhmagandhi to spend the day with Robbie. I had no desire to hear about Shauna's personal life. But Robbie adored his new sister, and Shauna and I both encouraged him to be a gentle, loving big brother. From the start, I set boundaries. I made it clear I would not join any family activities during my visits. Shauna tried ambushing me a few times, but she eventually gave up. Soon Robbie would be ready and waiting when I arrived, so I could spend time with him alone, free of unnecessary interactions. I wasn't rude to Shauna, just distant. Our conversations never went beyond small talk, the weather, Robbie's schoolwork, nothing more. Life moved forward, and I gradually adapted to a new rhythm of social interaction. I found myself with far more solitude than before, though not without the occasional fleeting romance. but I wasn't interested in committing to anything lasting. Strangely enough, that attitude seemed to work in my favor with several women, though I made a point of steering clear of the bicycles, as we used to call the hangers-on who trailed anyone showing the slightest interest. Years slipped by, and one day I came across a piece in the local paper. Callum McDarrell was engaged. He'd met his fiancée during their time together at Edinburgh University. She came from a world of privilege, old money, landed family, the kind that lived in sprawling ancestral estates somewhere in Sussex or Surrey. The article gushed about her elegance and framed the pairing as something out of a fairy tale, a rugged Highlander tamed by a refined English aristocrat. I decided I had to speak with her before she made her choice final. Tracking her down in Edinburgh wasn't difficult, and to my surprise, she was intrigued enough by the cryptic reason I gave to agree to meet. On neutral ground, of course. We arranged to talk in one of those atmospheric old pubs Edinburgh is famous for. Low ceilings, wood-paneled walls, and a constant hum of voices that drowns out every word unless you're seated elbow to elbow. I recognized her instantly from the newspaper photograph, and soon we were tucked away in a small booth, each with a drink in hand. "What's this about, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, unaware the name was an alias. "Forgive the secrecy," I said quietly. "But I've come with some information about Callum McDarrell. Nothing dangerous, just something you should know, and you can verify it yourself." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "All right, I'm listening. But if this is some sort of con—" "Not at all," I interrupted. "Let me start with a question. How well do you know Callum's daughter?" The confusion on her face was genuine. "His daughter? What are you talking about?" "He hasn't told you?" I asked. "You'll meet her eventually, I suppose. She lives in Loma Gandhi with her mother." "That can't be right," she said, shaking her head. "He's never mentioned having a daughter. We've even visited his parents in Loma Gandhi several times. No one has ever said a word about it. Not him, not them." "She exists," I said calmly. "Her name is Flora. She's 5 now and will start school this autumn. She lives with her mother and older half-brother barely half a mile from Callum's parents' home." "She's a lovely little thing," I added. "You'd probably adore her, though I imagine covering her expenses for the next 2 decades might put some strain on your household budget." Her expression hardened. "Do you have any proof of this?" Wordlessly, I slid across a copy of the divorce decree, the one citing Shona's adultery with Callum. "You can have someone corroborate it," I said. She skimmed the document, her lips tightening. "I can't believe he never told me," she muttered. "We're supposed to be married, and now you're telling me he has a child with another woman living practically on his doorstep?" "I'm sorry you had to hear it this way," I said evenly. "It's hardly a secret. You could have found out yourself sooner or later. For all I know, he might have planned to tell you before the wedding. Just don't mention how you learned. Better to know now than after you've said your vows. Marriage means sharing not just his life, but his obligations." She drew a deep breath. "I'll have to think about that, Mr. Johnson. But thank you." "May I keep this?" she asked, lifting the decree. "Of course," I replied. "Be my guest." She stood, nodded curtly, and left. I stayed behind, savoring a quiet surge of satisfaction as she disappeared into the noisy crowd. I never saw her again, and if things went as I expected, neither would Callum McDarrell. A month later, while picking up Robbie, I mentioned offhand to Shona that I'd read Callum's engagement announcement. "He was getting married," she said, eyeing me sharply. "But someone told his fiancée about Flora and she called it off. I hope that wasn't you, Rob." "Me?" I answered, feigning surprise. "Why would I do that?" Later that year, in yet another pub, I struck up a conversation with a stranger. One of my colleagues, hearing me talk about the breathtaking views from Mount Loma Gandhi, insisted I meet his uncle, an old hiker who knew the hills better than anyone. The man turned out to be a close friend of John McKee, the very man Shona called her father, who died in that horrific car crash before she was born. When he learned I'd once been married to Shona, he looked genuinely shocked and asked why we'd split. I gave him the abbreviated version. She'd had an affair and become pregnant by another man. He let out a low whistle and said, "Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Rob." "What do you mean by that?" I asked, confused. "Did you ever know that John McKee wasn't Shauna's real father?" he replied. I stared at him. "No. Are you serious?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. And the tragedy is that John never knew either. If he had, he might still be alive today." "I thought he died in a car accident," I said, unsure where this was going. "That's the official story the insurance company went with," he explained. "But the truth is a bit more complicated." He hesitated for a moment, as though weighing whether to go on, then lowered his voice. "After hearing what you've shared with me, I believe I can trust you to keep this to yourself. John came to me right after discovering that his wife was having an affair," he said. "He was shattered, completely broken. I tried my best to console him, but nothing I said could make a dent in his pain. I never breathed a word to anyone about what he told me. His wife never learned that he knew, because on his way home that same day, John drove his car straight off a cliff." He paused, lost for a moment in memory, then let out a heavy sigh. I've never stopped wondering if I could have done something, anything, to help him hold on, but I suppose he just couldn't bear what she'd done. The old man's eyes glazed for a heartbeat. Then he looked directly at me and said quietly, "I'm just grateful you're not like poor John." For a while after that, I threw myself into my work. Eventually, I landed a position leading the Scottish Highlands Infrastructure Department for a major telecommunications corporation. Getting that role was a big personal victory for me, though at the time I wouldn't have called myself happy. Things slowly began to improve. Looking back, I think the real turning point came when I met Ursula. She's a fiery German woman from Hamburg who left her husband after catching him too close with his assistant. She decided she wanted a fresh start and ended up here in the Highlands. She loves hill walking, hates nonsense, and approaches life with the same blunt honesty I do. Honestly, she can be a bit of a bear when she's in a mood, though most people insist she's a total fox. We've lived together for 3 years now. Marriage? We haven't ruled it out, but neither of us feels any rush to make it official. Robbie turned 18 just last month. Next year he'll be moving to Inverness to attend university. Until then, he spends most of his free time partying at Shona's house in Loch Magundy, usually in the company of Heather McDarrell. Heather didn't put up much resistance when Robbie made his interest clear. Given her position, she's destined to become chief one day. She seems intent on continuing the long-standing tradition of generosity, regardless of what it costs her. I see Robbie at least once a week when he visits Inverness. Over the past year, I've taken the time to explain the entire history to him. Why I divorced his mother, why I've cut ties with her and his half-sister Flora. It hasn't been easy for him to reconcile himself with what his mother and her circle have done, but that hasn't stopped him from enjoying Heather's company for the better part of a year. Of course, Robbie's connection to Heather isn't random. I was the one who recommended her for the job in the first place. Heather's husband, Donnie, yes, that Donnie, owns an animal feed supply business with a large warehouse near Inverness. He and Heather live out in Loch Magundy, though he's rarely home, constantly traveling to meet clients and suppliers. They've been married for 10 years and have a lovely 6-year-old daughter who spends most of her time with her grandmother, Lady Fiona. I'm fairly certain Donnie knows nothing about Robbie and Heather's arrangement. And I have no intention of telling him. Not yet, anyway. I'll wait until Robbie tires of her, and then we'll see how Donnie reacts when he finally learns the truth. Donnie's outward charm hides a very calculating, hardened man. He's not the kind who lashes out blindly, but I doubt he'd simply shrug this off. My guess? When the truth surfaces, the fallout won't be quiet. If I had to put money on it, I'd wager Donnie will unleash hell in his own cold, methodical way.